Hi, welcome to class. Last week what we did was we built we renamed a bunch of stuff. We renamed all our routers to actually call them routers, and renamed our models to call them models. And I'll open the code and we'll demonstrate that in a second. And we added some controllers and we named them controllers. And what controllers are, which actually will transition, I'll start showing you the code. So hopefully everyone can see the code clearly. I'm going to zoom in a little bit just to make this easier to see. That should make it clear. But what the controller was is we added this user controller is we created what we're trying to do is we were trying to create a login system. As part of creating the login system, what we ended up doing is we ended up creating a controller to validate users, to encrypt and decrypt their passwords, to check a bunch of other pieces of information um, that we now have. So we've added a new route, and you can we added our users.router, right? We renamed everything to router, and we refactored our code accordingly to the .router and .model, just to make it a little bit easier. We did not rename dbbase.model because dbbase is not a model of anything. It is just the base connector, right? In some other places, it might be called an index, or depending on how we structure it, it might be called something else. But for now, we're just calling it the DB base. Usually, the index is the file where you export all where you just expose the methods you want to expose. But that's conversation for another time. Um, right. So we added this new router last time. So for those of you who missed it, what this router does is it's the user router. So right now it lets us create a user, it lets a user log in, and it lets a user sign and it lets us sign up a user. So a user can get to the sign up page. We can actually create that user. A user can log in. Using these two, you get the login page and actually log in using this logic. Now, what's the logic of let's go through these pages one at a time. So the easy ones are just we render a sign up page, right? We're not yet confirming, we didn't confirm that the user's not logged in, which is something else we'll have to deal with eventually. But we've got a user is not logged in, right? But if the user is logged in, then we render the sign up page if the user is not logged in. Uh, the sign up page allows us to create a new user. How do we do that? We get some form data. The form, actually, let me run it just to demonstrate what it looks like. So npm run npm I. You are going to need to run npm install after during this one because there are a couple of new packages that we added. We added a bcrypt, we added bcrypt.js, which is an encryption library that handles our backend encryption stuff. So once I do my installs, I do npm run dev, and if everything is still set up correctly, then yes, my website runs again. Sorry about that. My mouse got lost for a second. I can't even find the program that's killing it. Oh, is that it? No, that's not it. Never mind. Uh, and if I open my website in a browser, so open my website in the browser, we've got the welcome to home page, right? And I can do /sign up. I get my sign up page, and I can do Nuttall with the password ABC, and I'll repeat the password ABC, and I'll click sign up. And hey, now I exist, right? And it took me immediately to the login page. And I just do Nuttall, and I do ABC for my password, and I log in. And hey, I've logged in, and it shows me you've logged in. It shows me the profile page with my token, right? Now, we don't want to put the token here, and this is what we're going to start dealing with. But before I do that, does anyone have any questions about what I just did, right? Because I just showed you a flow that we built last week, and I know not everyone was there. So, does anyone have any questions? Nope. Going once, going twice. All right. So as of that class, what we have there is we have a login flow that returns a token at the end of it. So we can create the user, we can log the user in, and once the user is logged in, we create a token for them. What we want to do now is we want to take some middleware and make sure that the author that the we want to start using the token. So the way we're going to use the token is there's a couple steps to it, right? We need to actually put the token in responses so that the token is now part of the request and response header flow. And we need to figure out how to do that. Now, a thing about this is that it is usually going to be managed by the client side stuff, which means that this is where we send the token to the client and the client returns that token with every request. So if you remember, if we go back to our, so if you remember, we go back to our middleware, our auth middleware, right? We've got the generate token, but then we've also got the verify token. And the verify token is checking the auth header, right? The headers for authorization for a user. Now, the way we're going to do, we're going to have to rebuild our verify token middleware a little bit. We're going to rebuild it to pay attention to a different role, or we're just going to have it just instead of verify token, it'll just decipher token, which means it'll decrypt it and like verify that the token is legit. But then we'll still have to pay attention to the request details, right? So we will still be responsible for looking at request role and whatever other features we might add to our token as far as information goes. Is that clear for everyone or not really? Awesome. Alex, Maria, clear for you too? Okay. Uh, before we go into this and we start writing code for today, we have two assignments that are out, right? We have the second assignment and the final assignment, and I want to quickly go through those. So I'm going to, right, we'll start with assignment two, and right. So for assignment two, you are given a completed version of assignment one, and what you need to add is you need to add middleware to the you need to add a middleware to the existing project, and this is what it's expected to do. I expect you to create a logging middleware. I want you to create one that verifies token, and I want you to create a way for the user to generate a token. Right? So the generating a token is not necessarily middleware, but it is like a logic of a flow. You might want to do it with a login. You might do it as simple as like, hey, oh, the user just generates a token. I'm not expecting a full login system for this. Uh, does anyone have any questions about that, or is that all clear? Awesome. So we're going to move on to the second one. The second one might be a little bit more confusing, so I want to talk you through all of it. So, final project. Here is the final project. So, the assignment can be done in a group of 1 to 10 people. I know that there's less than 10 people in the class, but if you want to get people to help you out, a maximum of 10 people are allowed to work on this project. So for this assignment, there will be minimum requirements and additional features. For each group member, you must complete one additional feature. Does everyone understand what that means? Yes, no? Alex, Maria, does that sentence make sense to you guys too? Perfect. So if you're one person, how many additional features do you have to complete? That's right. And if you've got two, you got to do two, and so on and so forth. So the minimum requirements, and like I gave you guys a blank project, right? I think I even didn't really put in a proper get ignore. You need to properly set up the project with a linter, get ignore, prettier, and anything else that's expected in an Express project, right? So for example, for like a Node.js or for Node.js, you need a package.json or whatever else one might expect to find in a project like this. I want you to include a database with at least one table. The database does not need to be DynamoDB. Does not need to be SQLite, but I recommend it, and it's going to be the easiest way for you to transfer it because if you do something more complex, you're going to have to do a setup script, and then I'm going to have to. I can do it for any database language, but I'd prefer that you work with SQLite, a router with two routes that use different HTTP methods. So that's your minimum, and then templates for all your routes. So keep in mind that this applies no matter how many additional routes you add. So as you keep adding routes, you still need templates for all of them. Um, Additional features. You can add a second database object. You can add two additional routes. You can add addition. You can always add additional routes if needed, right? So like if you add a second database table, you might end up adding another route or something like that. Middleware logger, a login system, which is probably one of the most complex things. Middleware to verify users, right? Which doesn't necessarily require login. You can mess around with some other things like what we did initially with our token system. And you can use, and the last one is to use a CSS library to style your templates. Does everyone know does everyone understand what those mean? Or is there any questions about the additional features or the base requirements? Okay. Have you guys put together teams yet or not really? Okay. I recommend you get started on that because the end of semester is coming up pretty fast, which is why I put these both out. And you guys have some time to do it, but not a ton of time. So I recommend doing it sooner rather than later. All right, moving right along. So those are the two assignments. Now, getting back to the topic at hand. So right now we have a login system. Uh, we have a login system that generates a token at the end of it. What we want to do is we want to, right, response.render, we render a profile with the username and the user's login, right? And the user's token. We never give back the password. This is an important point about our validate user function. And I'm not going to go through the whole flow. If you missed it in class, you will be able to read it on it. Like you're able to read the code on your own, or at least hopefully at this point in the semester, you should be able to read code on your own, especially something like this. But the validate user function is going to be a function that never actually returns the token. Sorry, that never actually returns the password. What it does is it takes in the username and the password. It gets user by username, so it uses a username to retrieve the user, and then compares the passwords using the bcrypt library, which because the user password is stored encrypted with salts and hash and all that jazz, then what happens is we need to decrypt. We don't need to decrypt it, but we need the encryption library to compare the passwords. Once our passwords are generated, once the passwords are compared, the bcrypt.compare, right? If it compares correctly, then we just return, then we generate a token, and we return said token to the user. If we can't generate a token, then what we do is we return an empty thing. And if there's no user object being returned, then the other function kicks in, and then the router knows what to do. All right. Anyone have any questions yet or no? No. Okay. So here's what we're going to be doing. What we need to do is we need to Okay. Now these are telling me what to do. Okay. This is where it's going to get a little fun, but we will deal with it. Okay. So the token, here's the issue. The token is double-sided, right? The token exists on the client side and on the server side. Or the token gets passed between the client and the server. That means that any work we want to do with the token where we're passing it back needs to be done on the client side. So we hand the token off to the client, and then the client has to read the token and return it to us as part of our use. So this means that we're going to have to add some JavaScript to our we're going to have to add some JavaScript to our code. So we look at our public folder and we're going to add a new file. We're going to call it script.js. It's going to just be some basic script, and it's going to be document.ready. This is going to take me back. Const, so um, let me just do. We'll try this. We'll see if it works, and then I will explain in more depth. But most of you should understand half of what's going on before I say anything. Uh, Now, because I want this file, because I want this to exist on basically every page, right? I'm going to go to parts. I'm going to go to footer because I want this to load at the end. And I do a script tag, and I do src equals, and how do we access our style sheet? It's just slash style sheet, so slash script.js. And then the type equals one moment, please. I'm forgetting my basic HTML. Type is text slash JavaScript. That's what it is. Text slash JavaScript. All right. So what we've done here is we've written a tiny script in our public folder, which hopefully will add the token to our, it should be res.json. Hopefully this should add the token directly to our page. We will see in a moment if that does in fact work. How will we see that? We will go in npm run dev, and I'm going to open my website again. Right, and I'm going to go back to my login page. And in my login page, I'm going to do the same login info that I set up before. Now, if I do inspect, I open the console, and error document already is not a function. But what if I do response dot JSON? Oh, response is not defined either. Response JSON. No, response is not defined. Okay, so none of that worked. Let's go back to, let me take a step back and let's work out exactly how to. Okay, sorry about this. I'm just trying to understand how to properly apply it. So basically, the question is just how do we send the. Okay. All right, here we go. If instead of the cookie here, what if we just do. So we can do this with cookies, but we don't want to do this with cookies for now. We're going to just leave the script alone there. We're going to go back to our user router. I'm going to minimize that. Okay. Inside my user router, I'm going to say if user, we're going to say response dot response dot headers dot header authorization bearer So so I've been running an entirely different setup all day, and that has back no errors here. Now, how do we test this? If we do that's how we test it. We go to our network tab, we reload our page, and in response to my initial post, I should, yep, authorization bearer. Okay. So just to show you what happens, we get back as a, over here, this is a, this is my token being sent as a header. What do we do with this? How do we actually make use of this going forward? How do we set it up so that the next page I go to on this site maintains that header, right? Because the moment I go to a different page, it's gone. I go back to my login and I refresh my login, which means I resend my login information and I get back the token. But the moment I leave this page, it's gone. Everyone with me so far? Okay. So what we need to do is we need to program our front end so that it actually takes this header and keeps it for future requests, right? So that any other request it does going forward preserves this header. How do we do that? If we're in something like Angular or React, right? So if I'm in React or Angular, ooh, I changed the logo. It's been a while since I've used Angular, but the basic idea is these are all front end libraries. And because these are front end libraries, what that means is that they are going to, they will make requests to the back end, right? And because they're the ones making the request to the back end, they can control what goes in it. So you can store the token and you can send the token as part of all of your back end requests going forward in a front end library, no problem. We are not using a front end library for this, right? And if I was using something like Postman, same deal, right? If I'm using something like Postman, all I got to do is, yeah, well, give me a second here. Okay. All right, so I've got my routes, and if I'm using, oops, the book's on that was for testing games. Okay. Right, I've got this, and this works. And Postman, right, gets those headers the same way anything else does, and I'd be able to, since I can edit my headers here, I would just be able to add another header called authorization with the bearer token value. Really not that difficult to do in a situation like this where I have direct access. The problem is that right now our browser is the one that is handling all of our requests, right? If I go to any page, which we still don't have a nav bar, which is something we should probably add. /games, for example, right? This is just being handled by the browser directly. There's no real middleman there. So I have to program it in such a way either that it takes advantage of the browser's built-in features and make the browser understand what's going on. That's option one. Option two is we use something, and well, that's what we have to do. But one way to do that is we can use something like cookies. The problem with cookies is that theoretically they are vulnerable to what's called cross-site attacks, which is basically if somebody hacks into the browser, they can pull the cookie out, and if they have the cookie, they have an active session which allows them to mess around with some things. Now, 1 second over here. All right. But if we cannot do it another way, I'm just going to really quickly, we're going to set it up using cookies just as a simple demonstration, and then we will go into a little bit more complexity later. All right. So I'm going to pause for a second here. All right. So after the break, we're coming back, and what we are going to do is we are going to be taking the cookie, which we have. We're going to be taking the token, which we have. We're going to be storing it in the cookie, and then we're going to verify that it comes back in the cookie. We're going to verify that the browser keeps passing it back. So let's begin. Step one is we need to, oops, okay, close the, let's start from scratch here. We've got our user controller. Actually, we don't even care about that. We've got our user router, right? This is where I log in. So instead of doing a response.header, I'm doing response.cookie. And then in that cookie, we are going to put a in the cookie, we're going to call this the auth cookie. And we're going to send back user.token in the auth cookie, and then we're going to put some other information here. We are going to say that the max age of the cookie, we're going to give this 24 hours. So to do 24 hours, we do, because we always start with milliseconds here, so we do 1,000 times 60, which converts it to second. So 1,000 converts it to seconds, 60 converts it to minutes, times 6, oops, times 60, which converts it to hours, times 24, which converts it to 1 day. Right? And then if I want to do it for a week, I would do times 7, right? Which would end up converting it to a week. So this is how long our cookie will last before it expires. And then we will also in here put one more thing. We'll put HTTP only. True. What does that do? We will find out eventually. So we've got our cookie set, and our user is logged in. Now we're going to take our middleware. Our auth middleware is going to verify our token, but instead of our code token being in header, it should be in request.cookie now. And it is going to be called our auth cookie, right? Called it our auth cookie. These two names have to match. The rest of this should work exactly the same. Token equals auth header and auth header dot split, right? So we're just splitting out the. We might want to rename this. So I'm going to rename symbol, which automatically renames it everywhere. It is auth cookie. And see how it quickly renamed it everywhere, which is a nice advantage of modern technology. Auth cookie and auth cookie split one. Okay, so now the thing is that this logic is there because we were doing the bearer token, right? Instead of all that, we just need to do, because we had the word bearer in the token before, we had to do a lot more logic. Now we just really simplify this to token equals auth cookie. And we don't even need that. Technically, we can literally just do, we can rename this to token. And And our auth cookie is our token, right? That should be exactly what it is. And then if we want to be safe, we can do dot strip. Strip. Let's just do it as token. To really be safe, we will unpack this. Although it should give us the value. No, there's no reason to unpack it because it's going to give us the value. Sorry. This is a lot of me guessing based on what's going on here. So, token is null, we return 400, right? If token equals null, otherwise we verify our token the same way we did before. There nothing changes, and then we pass on request.roll equals payload.roll, and we pass on to the next thing. So let us figure out what the next thing is going to be. Let's create a special games. Let's create a special games page that requires authorization. So we'll do router dot, or actually let's make this simpler. Let's just do some admin page, right? So this auth to generate a cookie, we're going to get rid of that. We're going to do verify token. We're going to leave this verify token here, but instead of role equals admin, we're going to change we could add roles to users, which is something we're probably going to do eventually, but for now what we're going to do instead of rewriting our database is we're just going to add over here. I'm going to go into my auth, and I'm going to take out, instead of saying request.role equals payload.role, we're going to say payload.request.user equals payload.user, right? And so now we're going to have our user available to us, and in this case we're going to look at the username. So we're going to go to our main router. We're going to say, hey, if username equals muttle, I should spell that correctly, then we are going to allow for initializing the DB. Now the problem with initializing the DB is it's going to like reset this whole process, which means that we're going to technically delete the user. So we're not going to want to use this as we're not going to want this logic here. So instead we're going to comment out the actual database initialization. So it's not actually going to initialize the database right now. And then I'm just going to do npm run dev, and this is up and running. So now, if we have done this all correctly, and if this works as we're expecting, what's going to happen is I'm going to go to my login page, login. I'm going to enter my username, Otto. I need to spell that correctly. Actually, just for fun, I'm going to spell this wrong, and just to demonstrate that this actually does, right, that does give me an error if it doesn't work. Instead, I'm going to do muttle, and I'm going to spell it correctly, and I'm going to do my password, my super secret password, and now I'm at my login page. But if we take this a step further, if we go to the init route, init, internal error, uh-oh, we crashed. Reading properties of undefined, reading auth cookie. What was undefined? Request.cookie, auth cookie. Why is cookie undefined? This is the question, right? Why is my cookie undefined, and why is this not working, right? My mistake. It's not cookie over here, it is cookies. Whoops. Request.cookies. It is plural. And let's check if it's plural at the other place. It is, nope. So we set a singular cookie, but we look for we set one, but when we're looking for them, we check multiple. So if we've done this correctly now, we will go back to our, actually we can just do the init because it should still be there. Nope, internal error again. Cannot read properties of undefined reading auth cookie. Okay, so first off is to stop this from crashing, we're going to do this. that doesn't work. Never mind. I'm gonna let that keep crashing. We're gonna go back to our login, and we're gonna log in again. We're gonna do username, and we're gonna do password, and we're gonna log in, and we get the login all set up. And now we are going to go to init. We're gonna get that same internal error, cannot read. Okay. This means that the cookies don't exist in the request. To check this really quick, what we're going to do is we're going to say console.log request dot cookies, and we'll see if that actually appears or not. Also comment out this line and instead just say token equals null, right? Because if token equals null, then I'll just get back a 401, which is fine for my purposes right now. So init, getting back in unauthorized, which is great, and token request.cookies is undefined. Okay. So what do we do when something we're looking at on the internet doesn't work? We complain loudly to the internet. Nope. In this particular case, what we're going to do is we know we're looking for the cookie. We know we're looking for cookies so we look at Express.js. Right, we open Express.js's API. Right, and we make sure that we're doing it for our current version, which is package.json. We are running Express version 4.2.1. So we're not on Express 5, we're actually on Express 4. Okay, because we're on Express 4, we look at this. We look at a request, and we look at cookies. So cookies does exist. Request.cookies.name. Using the cookie parser middleware. So we need to have the cookie parser middleware activated. Do we have that? No, we do not have the cookie parser. We do not have the cookie parser, and that is what is causing us issues. So we're going to go into our index, and we're going to go up here at the top, and we're going to, along with our bodies, going to do a cookie parser equals require cookie dash parser. I believe this is included with no, it is not. Perfect. So it's not included with the cookie parser is not included by default, so we have to do npm I cookie parser and added the two packages we need. Perfect. And now if we npm run dev, so we're up and running again, and now we just need to go down to our app.use where we're using our body parser, etc., and we do app.use. Now, an important thing to note here, which I don't think we've actually discussed in the past, is that the order of these matters. The order of my middlewares matters because the middlewares are checked in that order. So a lot of these we need to do before we do things like that use them, right? The other thing is that if we're using for example, an auth middleware or something like that for every single route, and we put it in here, we want to make sure it goes above my routers so that it runs before my routers. Now that we have our actual cookie parser installed, if we go back to our init and we run this, I get the unauthorized, but hey, my auth cookie is there now, which is amazing, which means I can go back to my auth middleware, right? We can go over here, we can delete this line because we don't need that anymore. We can undo that, and we can get rid of that line, and we can save, and we can refresh, and we get a forbidden. That's progress, right? That means that my token worked and my token was parsed, and I'm getting a forbidden means I'm not allowed to be here. That's fine. That just means that we're doing something wrong on our end, right? Request.username, it should be request.user.username. Because we're putting the whole user into thing, and the user.username is what we actually need. Internal error. We crashed. Unable to read properties of undefined username. Lovely. So we go back to our auth, and we go back to request.user equals payload.user. Okay, refresh again. Another internal error, undefined, reading undefined properties of username again. So request.user, just for fun, request console.log request. Ah, why is it payload still? Where is it? Sorry. This is part of just messing with the auth, right? Token process and payload. Payload.user. What we should really do is we should really do console.log payload. Let's see what's in here. And just to denote what we're actually doing, I've been doing a lot of debugging in different languages in the past few days, and I've gotten in the habit of actually titling my console.log messages to just make it clear what it is I'm logging. Payload. So I save this, I reload the page, I get the internal error again, but if we take a look up, we get our... Alright, so this is my request object, and before all of this, which is quite long, I should get my... Oops, okay, here we go. Start this payload. What? No, that's not it. No, I got this error. Here we go. Payload is just returning as an object. That's useless to us, right? So we do JSON dot stringify, and I'm going through this piece by piece, and I'm doing this for you. Like I'm demonstrating this, and I'm recording this because it's important for you to see how to handle broken stuff. I don't like that this whole request is dumping out, so I'm going to go back into my back into not my users, back into my main route where I'm doing this dumping the request, and we're going to delete that because we don't actually need to see the request right now. We're still getting the error over here, and we're fine with that error happening. If we want to, we can get rid of the error by just going back to user, or we can use something else, which is we can use this nice little question mark. So what this question mark does, it says, hey, does the first object exist? If the first one exists, then you go to the second one. If the first one doesn't exist, you just stop there. And that is like a really important thing to do. By the way, am I going too fast for anyone? Because I don't see you on the screen, and I'm very much just like working through a problem and demonstrating working through a problem in some depth. So I want to make sure you guys are still here and you guys are paying attention, or at least enjoying the show in the background of whatever else you're doing right now. All right. Once we get to the end, I'm going to explain how it all works. Once it works, I will explain how it all works in more depth. But as long as there's like some basic understanding of what's going on, I am happy. And then I need that. Perfect. Okay, so we restarted. We're going to run this again. We get a 403. That is fine. Here we go. Okay. So my payload is username equals Matel time to expire and expires as. So what we actually want is so now that I know the actual contents of my payload, we know user doesn't exist. So we do username and then equals payload dot username. So our token contains expiry and some other information, right? But the only piece of information that we care about internally, once we've verified that the token is still valid, is the username. So we go back to my main router now. Oh, if I go back over here now, I'm getting forbidden, and I'm still dumping out the username, but we're looking for user.username, which does not exist, because now it's just request.username. So if we look at request.username, and now we run this, hey, DB initialized. All right, it works. So we did not actually rewrite the database, we just configured our auth properly. There's one last step to doing auth properly, and we're going to talk about that in more depth in a moment, which is setting up roles and permissions. But I want to take a step back and I want to explain what I've done so far. There's a lot of mess and junk. Okay, so first of all is we're using cookies. Cookies are things that are just passed back and forth. The browser creates them. I'm sorry, the background, not the browser, but the server creates them and hands them off to the browser, and then the browser knows to hand them back. And they keep getting handed back and forth. So I have my cookie. I have my cookie parser, which the same way that my URL parser parses my URL, my body parser parses my body, my cookie parser parses my cookies, which means that it will take the inside the HTTP request, the cookie part gets read by this cookie parser, which is perfect because it means that which means that it's going to work. So we've added this cookie parser middleware. Yeah, we've also totally rewritten our verify token middleware. Instead of looking at the header, it looks at the cookies. It looks for an authorization cookie, which is the cookie we get, which is the name we've given our cookie, and it verifies the payload. We're gonna actually delete this console.log because we don't need that anymore. And then it pulls out the username. So right now what we're doing is we're pulling out a username. What we might want to do is we might want to then take the username, take the verified username, right? And we might want to either write a second okay, forget about that. I will explain that in a moment. We then take the username, we put it as part of the request, we add the username to the request. And now if I go into my main, and now over here, this route actually checks the request username for if it's the correct username, and if it's the correct username, it lets you, well, we commented that out, we're going to comment that back in. It lets you it lets you actually initialize the database. Does that flow make sense to everyone? Kartik, Alex, Maria, make sense? Kartik, Alex, you with me? Nope. Okay. So moving right along here, we've got a working token setup, right? We don't need the generate token over here anymore, so we're going to delete it. We do still verify token as a middleware, and wherever else I go, I can verify my token and like create authorized and uh, specific things. So let's talk about permissions. Now, what are permissions? In short, permissions are what users are and are not allowed to do based off of some arbitrary set. There's a lot of security theory. Actually, I'm going to make There's a lot of theory around permissions, specifically about like who should have what permissions, how many permissions should you do, and there was like some interesting talk I've heard and some interesting stuff. For example, where even if you're like a head of CEO or something, there's a good security measure called principle of least permissions, which basically says if you're not doing something, that you don't need regular access. Like if you don't need regular access to a specific set of permissions, then you should not actually have those permissions. Instead, what you should do is let it you should just let those permissions stand with whoever else uses them. So, which means that sometimes you might have to ask someone else for additional authorization, and that's a little bit frustrating. But we don't really care about that now. We're talking about permissions from the configurator. We're not talking about like security principles. That's the other course. For this course, what we're talking about is we're talking about setting up user permissions. Because right now, what we're doing is we're saying, hey, if the username matches this particular username, then you get that. Then you can wipe the database. That's not great, right? What we would want is we want, let's say, an admin role, or we'd want a permission string. And if you have the correct permissions, then you're able to do it. So what is a permission string? Um, think about what you could potentially do, right? Think about like every possible permission is a yes or no, right? Either you have permission to do this or you don't. And there's like a dozen things that you can do, right? For example, you can access a user account, access user data, create user data, delete users, add games, delete games, whatever other information we want or whatever other authorization we would have in this system. With me so far? Okay. Now, all of those, right? All of those are always a question of yes or no. Can you do this or not? So can you read users? Can you write users, right? Can you delete users? Those are, let's say, three questions, and the question is always yes or no. A way to represent that is in binary, is a one or a zero, right? Now, technically, what I can do is I can set up one binary number, right? One string of binary that represents all of these permissions. So, for example, row number 6 would say, like the first position, the 0 or 1 would say, do you have access to view users? Okay, and then the second one would be do you have access to write to users? And then the third one would be, hey, do you have access to delete users? Okay, and we would just structure a basic, what's called a byte string, which represents, and since that represents a very specific number, you won't have to worry about, we can do a lot of permission checking where we keep the number really small. And this is in general how permissions work. Do you have who can edit it, who can read it, who can write it? We use permission strings to represent our permissions. So what we would do in this case is we would add an addition. There's two ways to handle this. One is we create a roles table, and we assign people roles, and then we assign the roles um, permissions so that we can edit roles of a group, right? We can edit the permissions of a group, and we can assign and unassign people from specific groups. That is one way to handle our permissions, and the other way to handle our permissions is to just put the permission string directly in the user table, which gives us a little bit more fine-tuned, but it does make it a little bit more of a headache. For our purposes, just to keep this simple, we're gonna go into our script to initialize our database, right? Not to populate our data. To populate, we do not populate with any users, so that's fine. But we're gonna take our users, we have our username, we have our password, and we're going to add one more thing. We're going to add a permissions is going to be binary, not. Oh, thank you for catching me on that. Yes. So going back to, we're going to go into our tables, and we're going to go back into our database initialization screen, and we're going to say, hey, we're going to add a permissions table to the database, and I believe binary is a valid data type. Sorry, I have too many windows open right now, but okay. Um, SQLite data types. Data types SQLite. integer null real blob. So stored as input real integer. Okay. So we're going to just say this is going to be a integer. I'm going to say not null. We're going to say default 0. And this is the first time we've used this where we're actually setting a default value. So if the permissions are not given, we're going to just set the default to 0. Now remember that because of how binary works, every flag is always in a specific position, which means if you have that number or not, it's going to be, we just store it as we're going to store it as a number, and this will make more sense in a moment. All right. One little thing is, okay, we're going to take a pause here. Turning back on, fade to demo. One really important thing to keep in mind is that the binary number system is just a different number system, right? But binary numbers are just numbers, correct? Which means that we can do some basic mathematical operations with them and we can figure things out based off of them and we can just store them as integers and convert the integers to binary and back based on what we need. So for right now, we are going to introduce a permission structure to our code. So the first thing we did is we set up permissions in the database. And this is all we're going to, that's all we need. We're just going to need the one integer in the database for the permissions. Aside from that, we will get, um, sorry about that. Okay, aside from the integers, aside from the permission integer, we are in the database. We're going to start protecting some roles, or we're going to protecting some routes, and we're going to redesign our authorization system to actually protect those routes. So we are going to start with. We're going to start by resetting our database. So I've got my initdb right. I have to be me to init the database. I'm just going to refresh this page. Oops. Because this is not currently running, that's not going to work. npm run dev, so we're back up and running. And I go to my database, and I refresh my page. Database initialized, which now means if I go back to VS Code and I check my database and I look at the table users, we've got ID, username, password, and permission integer with a default value of 0, which is perfect, right? Which means that if we create a new user, we'll get that default value of 0. Okay, I'm going to close that. So now we're going to go through our code and we're going to write up how we want to handle this. So we're going to leave that the payload just gets the. So what we're going to do here is we're going to have payload.username will get us the username. We do not want the user to know their permissions, right? What we want to do is we want to keep that secure on our server on the back end. So we're going to do is we're going to start by figuring out what permissions we want. So for now, you know what? Let's just have a single permission called the admin permission, right? So if the admin permission, so if you have 1, you're authorized. If you're 0, you're not authorized. So instead of verify token, we're going to create a new. We're going to. So we have our generate token, which we don't need anymore, right? Because if we go to my user, right, I run to the sign up, and over here we create the cookie with the login. We're creating the cookie. So we're going to go back to my generate token, and we're going to delete this because it is no longer in use. And we're also going to delete the reference to it over here because it is not in use anymore. So, excuse me. All right, we create our we create our things over here. So what we're going to do is we're going to say that when you sign up, we give you the permission of when a user is created, we're going to encrypt password and then username, and we'll set username and password, and we'll set. Actually, we will leave the permissions at 0 for default. We'll leave the default permissions, and we'll say that the way we authorize users is we go into the database, we manually edit the database for now. Eventually, we'd want like a better permission structure, but we're going to cheat it like that. What we are going to do though is we are going to say instead of just a verify token, we're also going to be const check permissions. Right now, I don't know if we want check permissions to be inside verify token or not. It makes sense to include the It actually does make sense to include the logic here. So what we're going to do is we're going to say get user data, get user params from DB, and then and user params to object. Basically, we want the verification to happen all at once, right? I'll show you what that looks like in a second. So if we go into our model for users, when we get our user, right? We're already selecting star, which is perfect, which means we're going to get the username, the password, and we're going to get the username and the password, which we might not necessarily want to do, but we'll do that. But we are going to do that for now. So the only thing that I got to do here is I'm going to do const get user by username, and this is going to equal acquire dot slash actually dot slash models slash users. All right, and so what I'm doing here is I'm importing get users by username, and then we say get user by username using. We're going to take this and move it down to the bottom over here. And I'll explain what, so we do get, we're going to await const, and we're going to get right. So we have this permissions column, and what we are going to do is we're going to get the permissions value out of the thing, and then we're going to return a request, and then we're going to say request user is going to have two fields. We're going to have username, and we're going to have permissions. So what we've done here is we've adjusted it so now our user object inside the request that anyone who verifies the token can access is they can check for the username and they can check for permissions as well. So going back to our main router, verify token, we can say instead of request.username, we'll say request.user dot permissions equals 1. So here we're just checking for a basic, for the basic permission of, here we're saying, hey, are you authorized or not? This is like the simpler version of this. And I think we're gonna stop once we verify this, make sure it works, and make sure everyone understands it, and then we'll move on to a more complex version of permission structures next week, if we have the time. But it'll just be a slight extension of this concept. So, does anyone have any questions? Let's actually demonstrate this to make sure that this works. So we're gonna go back instead of a init, which we can't do anymore. And the one problem is that right now what we're doing is we're using the authorization to initialize the database, which is going to be an issue. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to do something silly. Actually, no, not silly. We're going to say that the profile page requires authorization. We're going to say, we're going to go to the users router, and we're going to create a new router dot get slash profile request response. And one other thing is before that, we're going to do verify token. So we verify the token and then we move on to my request response. And since I verified the, we have to import verify token. So all the way at the top over here. Going to go const verify token space equals require dot slash nowhere slash okay. So we're going to verify token, and if the token, so verify token means we're checking for a valid token to begin with. And then if that's the case, we do response dot render profile with an object of user with the title of title. User dot request dot user dot username profile, and then we will also include request dot this is going to be user is request dot user. And we don't have a user token, which I think the profile initially expects. So we're going to go into our views, and we're going to go into the profile view, and we're really quickly going to change this up. Instead of token, we're going to say permissions, and instead of user.token, we're going to do user.permissions. So if we have done this all correctly, which hopefully we have, we will be able to open this. We will be able to, we've initialized the database, so we're able to register. No, not register, sorry. Sign up. Sign up. Sign up, whoops, wrong page, with the username of Muddle, with a password of 12345. Okay, sign up. Now I log in, Muddle, 12345, and I get a basic profile without my permissions, right? But now if I go to slash profile, I'm going to say it's going to give me a 404. Why does it give me 404? Because I misspelled it. Let's spell it correctly. Oops, Control C. Control V. And it shows me my permissions as 0. Right, so it's showing me my permissions as 0, but it's letting me access, right? What I'd really like to do is I'd like to say if request.user.permissions equals not equal 1. Sorry. If it equals 1, then we let them in. Else response dot redirect to slash to index. Right? Is that what we called the home, or did we call it something? Just the response dot redirect to slash home. And now if I refresh my profile, I get redirected to home because I don't have the permissions. So the way that we're going to edit the permissions now is we're going to go into the database and we're going to just look at my permissions over here. We're going to set them to 1. Commit. Right. So now I've made a change to the database, and that change is that the user's permissions are now set to 1. So now if I go back to the slash profile I can see the page, but if my permissions were not set to 1, I could not see the page. So what we've done here is we've actually started the process of we've taken our token and we're actually storing our token in the cookies, which means that it's constantly being passed back and forth between us and the user. And more importantly is that we've taken our cookie and we're going a step further because now we are actually applying a permission to the user. We're not giving the user their permissions in the cookie. This is an important point. We are always checking our database because even if someone manages to hack our cookie secret and to sign a cookie and send it in, our source of truth is the database, not the cookie, which is an important additional layer of security that we have there. Does anyone have any questions about this? Nope. Okay. If that's all clear, then we are done for the day. Um, the next thing to do with something like this would just be to create a middleware, or not a middleware, but create a tool that actually allows us to add and check specific permissions, right? So instead of just doing user.permissions equals 1, we would say user dot, and then we'd like mention a specific permission, right? Like if user.permission dot, admin, and we would check for that, and the way for checking and the checking for that would use a function to convert this potentially very long integer into a binary, and then it would check for that specific flag in binary. There's ways to do that, and it gets a little bit complex, so I'm not going to cover it today. Like I said, we may cover it next week, or we may move on to just styling the pages using some basic, just using a CSS library to take our templates and make them look a little better than the way they look now. All right, I'm going to stop there for today. So